You know that feeling, right? That there's a me in here, sitting right behind your eyes, calling the shots. I choose this, I want that. But what if all of that is an illusion? What if the person you think is in the driver's seat isn't actually steering the car at all? That's the huge provocative idea we're digging into today. Just let that sink in for a second. You don't control your behavior. You don't choose what you want. I mean, that sounds fundamentally wrong, doesn't it? It goes against every single instinct we have about who we are. But this isn't some mystical riddle. It's a conclusion that's popping up in labs all over the world. The idea is that our actions aren't authored by us. They just emerge from this incredibly complex web of causes and conditions. So, that's the big question, isn't it? If the me I feel so connected to isn't the one pulling the strings, then what is? The answer isn't a simple one-liner, but I promise you, if you stick with me through this, it could completely change how you see, well, basically everything.
Okay, so first up, let's dive into this myth of control. We're going to start by really challenging that gut feeling that there's a little CEO in our heads making executive decisions.
Here's how science frames it. What feels like your choice is really what's called an emergent property. It's the end result of countless systems all interacting. Your genetics, your upbringing, what you had for breakfast, that conversation you had last week. And the self, that feeling of I, it's not the cause of the action. It's more like the narrator, the storyteller who shows up after the fact to create a neat and tidy story about why it all happened. And here's where it gets really wild. For centuries, spiritual traditions have talked about this, dissolving the ego, seeing through the false self. What's so amazing is that modern science is now arriving at the very same place, not through ancient texts or meditation, but through hard data and brain scans. The conclusion is the same. The idea of an isolated, independent self just doesn't hold up. All right, let's get into the evidence. This isn't just one person's theory. We're talking about a synthesis of findings from all over the place. Let's start the scientific takedown of the self. So first up is the philosopher Thomas Metzinger. He has this fantastic term, the ego tunnel. Think of it like the desktop on your computer. You click on icons, you move files around, but you're not actually inside the computer's circuitry, right? You're just interacting with a user-friendly model. Metzinger says our self is exactly that. It's a model, a representation that helps us navigate reality. There's no little person inside the machine. Then you've got Michael Gazzaniga's incredible work with split-brain patients. He discovered this thing in our brain he calls the interpreter, and its whole job is to make up plausible stories for why we do what we do. But here's the absolute kicker. It does this after the action has already happened. So your hand reaches for a glass of water, and a split second later, the interpreter serves up the thought, oh, I'm thirsty. The feeling of choice is often just your brain's PR department spinning a good story. Okay, get ready because this one is a real mind-bender. Imagine a simple choice. Press a button with your left hand or your right. How long before you're consciously aware of your decision do you think your brain has already made the call? Milliseconds? A second? Nope. Using fMRI scans, researchers can see your decision taking shape in your brain up to 10 full seconds before you have any idea what you're going to choose. So let that really land. Your conscious thought, the feeling of, okay, I'm choosing coffee now, isn't the cause of you getting coffee. It's the report, it's the news headline that shows up on your mental screen, telling you what the deeper systems have already set in motion. It's a notification, not a command. So, if there's no CEO, you've got to be wondering, how does anything get done? Well, the answer comes from fields like cybernetics. It's all about feedback loops. We're not commanders shouting orders into a void. We're participants in a constant dance. You do something, which changes the environment, which changes how other people react, and their reaction then changes you. It's this beautiful, constant flow of mutual influence, not top-down control. And the important thing to get here is that this isn't some fringe theory. We're talking about a massive scientific synthesis. Neuroscience, systems theory, cognitive science, network dynamics, they're all converging on the same radical conclusion. Our common sense idea of an isolated self making independent choices, it's a beautiful story, but it's a fiction. Okay, so this is all fascinating stuff, but what does it actually mean for our lives? Well, once you start to really take this idea seriously, one of the first things to just fall apart is the entire concept of blame. This right here shows the huge shift. The old way of thinking, built on this illusion of choice, always leads to blame. We ask, why did they do that to me? But this new model, it doesn't ask a question of blame. It asks a question of clarity. It asks, what were all the conditions and systems and pressures that shaped this person to act in this way? You see the difference? It's a move from judgment to understanding.
And this is just a bombshell of a statement. Think about it. So much of our society, our ideas of resentment, our legal system of justice, even the concept of forgiveness, it's all built on one single assumption, that people are authors of their actions who could have done otherwise. But if all the science we just looked at is right, if our choices are just reports on unconscious processes, then that whole foundation turns out to be a myth.
So, if we're not in control, does that mean we just give up? How do we ever accomplish anything? How does discipline even work? Well, this leads to a whole new way of looking at it. Let's talk about discipline in a world without a self. Most of us think of discipline as brute force, right? It's this internal battle where the good part of you has to wrestle the bad part of you into submission. It's all about control. But after this shift in perspective, discipline isn't about control at all. It's about coherence. It's what happens naturally when all that internal conflict and fighting just stops. There's a perfect little story to illustrate this. Imagine a weaver at her loom, totally in the flow. Her hands are moving perfectly, creating this intricate pattern, but she's not thinking about it. She doesn't have to try to remember it. She and the pattern are one. Her actions are completely aligned, totally effortless. This is pure contact. But then, a thought pops into her head. Wow, I'm a really good weaver. I need to keep this up. I should protect this skill. The moment that I steps in, the moment the self arrives to manage the process, everything changes. She's not just weaving anymore. Now she's performing the act of being a good weaver. And the thread, which was weightless before, suddenly becomes heavy with the burden of performance. So what's the solution? To try harder? To double down on control? No, it's the opposite. The answer is to let go. By simply loosening her mental grip, by dropping the need to manage her identity as a good weaver, the natural, effortless pattern just returns. Coherence comes back, not because she forced it, but because she finally stopped interfering with it. And this brings us right to the heart of it all. The huge shift we've been exploring is moving from seeing yourself as the author of your life to understanding yourself as a participant within it. This table really breaks down all the jobs our ego gives itself. Look at that top one, impression management. The ego is busy trying to manage how you're seen by others. And what does that replace? An honest, simple presence. Or look at narrative control, the ego's constant need to manage what everything means. That gets in the way of just making direct contact with reality itself. Each one of these is a distortion, a filter the self puts between us and the world. And that leads to this incredibly powerful redefinition of a word we all think we understand: freedom. We usually think freedom means having more choices, more options. But in this new framework, real freedom isn't about getting more items on the menu. It's about the end of all that internal noise, the end of the static, the end of the distortions created by a self that is constantly trying to manage and perform. And that's the question I want to leave you with. It's not an easy one for sure, but it's the one this whole scientific takedown of the self forces us to ask. If you are not the author, what becomes possible when you finally stop trying to be? What happens when you let go of that massive burden and just participate?